Hey everybody, it's Mike from the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios and brought to you by official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international award-winning author Mia Molson-Zia, available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. We're here with a terrific gentleman who is a five-time Emmy-award-winning sports director and 40-year veteran directing games for the New York Mets, New York Yankees, the Islanders, Atlanta Braves, the NBA on TNT, NHL on NBC, college football, basketball on CBS, and also he did some Major League Baseball for ESPN, CBS College Sports, and also the Baltimore Ravens preseason football. He has a passion for classic rock and did some songwriting back in the teen years. And it all is coming to fruition as well, too. And he's got a book out called Classic Rock Songs Revealed, Volumes 1 and 2. And I love it so much, I didn't want to put that down. So we'll be covering Volume 1. And, of course, we'll get to Volume 2 as well. I mean, just a lot of stories covering Billy Joel, Chicago, Love and Spoonful, Jackson Browne, and more. Live, ladies and gentlemen, from Plus Studios in beautiful downtown Atlanta, Georgia, the amazing five-time Emmy Award-winning sports director, 40-year veteran, and author of Classic Rock Songs Revealed, Volumes 1 and 2 with Kathleen LaCroix. He's got a college of knowledge, ladies and gentlemen, the amazing Dan Reagan. Dan, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for that very, very nice introduction. I appreciate that. Great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on board, Dan. And you're a five-time Emmy Award-winning sports director, 40-year veteran, directing games for the New York Mets, the Yankees, Islanders, Atlanta Braves, NBA on TNT, NHL on NBC, CBS Sports, college football and basketball, also MLB for ESPN, also the Baltimore Ravens, and your passion for classic rock and songwriting back to the teen years. And you managed to combine everything into one amazing career. You start off with Billy Joel, Chicago, and it has just gone beyond. The story behind the song, Dan, before we get into all that, tell us how you first got started.
How I first got started. Well, at the risk of sounding like Ted Baxter from Mary Tyler Moore.
I don't know the story.
It all started. I dreamt of being a sports radio announcer. I wanted to do sports on the radio. And I went to college in Long Island. It was called C.W. Post University. It's now Long Island University. Immediately got to work at the radio station. Was on the air pretty quickly, became the sports director in my sophomore year. Did 2 years of basketball and football play-by-play. Enjoyed doing that very much. And I had some very dear friends who graduated a year ahead of me. One who went to and is still in Williston, North Dakota.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah, and another guy that went to Burlington, Iowa, and did 35 years as a disc jockey out there and was a program director. And I thought that was the track that I was going to take. But all things kind of changed my senior year in college. I had, let me back up. In my junior year in college, I took an introduction to TV course, hit it off really well with the professor. Senior year comes and I did an internship at what was then a fledgling sports cable company called Sports Channel. It was part of Cablevision. Mm-hmm. And they're now Madison Square Garden Sports. So I was doing that internship first right around this time of the year in January. And I was also I signed up for a second television course because that same professor was teaching it. And this was in more television production. But I was still thinking that I was going to go into radio. So I'm doing my internship, and one day I'm back in my dormitory, and the star football player's girlfriend, who I knew and lived upstairs from me, sees me. We said hello, asked me what I was doing. I told her I'd just come back from doing this internship. She asked me how I liked it. I told her I didn't like it. She asked why. I said because I wasn't allowed to touch any of the equipment, and I didn't think I was really geared toward doing that kind of work anyway. And little did I know, she said, what would you like to be doing? I said, I'd like to be, instead of in Cablevision, I'd like to go across to Sports Channel because I love sports. I know a lot about sports. And even if I'm not doing a whole lot there, at least I'm embedded with sports. And she said, I might be able to help you with that. Little did I know she was the daughter of the number 2 man in charge.
Interesting.
And so, yeah. So she made a call. She then called me up, about an hour later. And she said, starting next week, don't go to Cablevision, go across the Sports Channel. So I started my internship there, and I was doing, gopher work really for the remaining months of my college career. But before I got out, I got a phone call one day in my dorm from a girl that I was friendly with who said that she was going to use my television production class that I was taking to do produce a 1 hour variety show.
Mhm.
And she said, "You're going to direct it." And I said, "No, I'm not." And she said, "No, you don't understand." She said that she had asked the professor if she could use our class to do her show, and he said, on one condition, you have Dan Reagan be the director. So I had the professor's phone number. I called him up and I said, "What are you doing to me?" And he said, "Look, you're going to do this. I see something in you. You're going to do this for her, and you'll be fine. And just go ahead and do it." And so I went and this is my senior year in college. I'm graduating in 2 months, and I directed this 1 hour variety show of hers. Well, lo and behold, fast forward, then I graduate. Sports Channel hired me right out of college, um, and they offered me a chance to, instead of what I had been doing was I was going to Mets games and Yankee games and Islander games, and I was just being a runner and doing stuff like that. And then I started becoming a production assistant, working with the graphics. They gave me a chance right out of school to do that job and get paid. And
Wow.
I'm like, yeah, this doesn't sound too bad. These are, I mean, I'm going to get paid to go watch my favorite teams, and get paid for it and keep score of the games, which I sometimes did at home anyway.
Mhm.
So I thought I was putting my radio dreams and aspirations on the back burner, and I signed up for that. And then I got immersed into that. And within 4 or 5 years, I went up through the ranks and I became a director. Never thinking that that would happen, never dreaming that that would happen. And all that time, that college professor had seen something in me. And in 1988, it was actually, I became the director for the Mets. And one time during one of the games, one season, this was long before the score bug where you had the pitch and velocity and all that. We had a radar gun behind home plate. That professor came and he worked the game for me, holding the radar gun behind home plate. So it was a real
Huh,
thrill for me to
interesting.
have him there with me. Yeah. So that's really how I got started. And I was in New York for 12 years, working for Sports Channel and covering the Islanders and the Mets. And at the time, they were the New Jersey Nets. Did some indoor soccer. And then 1993, I got an opportunity to move to Atlanta with my wife and go to work for Turner Sports. And I was there for 12 years and directed the Braves all 12 of those years. Did the NBA for 6 years. Did some hockey when the Thrashers came in.
Mhm.
Did that for 3 years. And then I went to ESPN. So
Wow. That was so amazing. And of course, along the lines, you also did some preseason football for the Baltimore Ravens, which, by the way, they did quite well until they got knocked out of the playoffs. So they're starting to come around pretty good.
yeah, yeah, I think it might have been the season. You know, everything with the Ravens on offense hinges with the health of Lamar Jackson. And when he went down the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season, instead of averaging like 25 or 26 points a game when with Lamar in, they then went down to they were scoring like maybe 16 points a game. So he's really, really critical to their success, and it really hurt them that he couldn't play against the Bengals in that playoff game.
Oh, that was too bad. That was too bad. I mean, difficulties with our mics here, so we're going to get that started here. So we're going to get that plugged in here. We are with Dan Reagan of Classic Rock of to, I think technical gremlins managed to get in too. I think somebody from the Ravens was trying to mess with my microphone here. So, or somebody on the back. Oh my goodness. You got to enjoy all that. So, of course, you did some
Yep.
games like the Mets, Yankees, and Islanders and all that. What would you say were some of the most memorable games that you've done and what stood out for you?
Well, I mean, it's hard to choose a memorable game. There are really more memorable moments. So there was one, there was one memorable game. Um, it was I'm trying to remember what year it was, but Pete Rose was managing the Cincinnati Reds. And there was a play at first base that went against the Reds, and he came out and he pushed the umpire and immediately got ejected. And the fans started throwing stuff on the field, and the game was delayed for like half an hour while the field was being cleared off. And I mean, back in that day, this was long before replay review and all of that. So, there were managers that would come out and argue a call at a base, And those arguments were a dime a dozen, and sometimes they got escalated, and the manager got thrown out. But never did you see a player or a manager, no less, physically push an umpire. So that just goes to the unexpectability. No matter how many times you watch a sporting event, and that's part of the fun of doing the job that I did. You never know when you're going to see something that you've never seen before. And Pete Rose pushed that umpire, Dave Pallone, and he got suspended, of course. But that was pretty memorable. There were a lot of memorable hockey games that I did. I was with the Islanders, not in a directing role yet, but I was with the Islanders when they were winning their 4 Stanley Cups, and so that was a lot of fun. Early in my career, I also worked with, did Yankees games, and we had Mickey Mantle on our broadcast, and my job was to really work with Mickey and assist him in the broadcast booth. And so that was a lot of fun. And I tell people that I'm probably the only person that can say they won a $10 bet from Mickey Mantle. And when he paid me, there was a little voice inside of me that said, make him sign it. And he handed me the $10 bill, and I said, you know what, Mick, I'm going to take this bill out of circulation. Would you sign it? And he said, you want me to sign it? I said, yes, please. So he takes the $10 bill, and he starts to scribble, and he starts giggling. And he wrote, to Danny, you lucky asshole, Mickey. And that is hanging in my man cave downstairs in a frame.
And may I ask you, what was that bet? What was that bet?
Okay, so the bet was Sports Channel was doing a choose the all-time Yankee team position by position. So one night they did choose the all-time first baseman, and they'd throw 3 names up. So first base, Lou Gehrig, Don Mattingly, and whomever, and the fans would vote. And Mickey didn't do every game; he would only do 50 or 60 games during the season. Well, as luck would have it, the night that they were voting on the all-time greatest center fielder, Mickey was in the booth. And they put Mickey up, it was vote for either Mickey Mantle, Joe DiMaggio, and I don't remember. It didn't matter who the third guy was. Well, Mickey said on the air, I know who should win that. And he meant DiMaggio. And we got to a commercial, and I looked at him and I said, Mick, you don't think you're going to win this? He says, no way, Dan. And I go, Mick, you will win this going away. And he said, no. And I just went, I smell a bet. And he went, you want to bet? And I said, yeah. He goes, what do you want to bet? I said, I'll bet you $10. He goes, okay, you're on. Well, when the results were announced in the 8th inning, he had left after the 7th. After the 6th inning, he'd leave in the 7th inning. So the next time he came in, of course he won. It was it's mostly a popularity contest, and he was arguably one of the most popular Yankees of all time. And he won going away. So the next time he came into the booth, I said, hey, Mick, we've got some settling up to do. And he said, oh, yeah, who won? And I said, take a guess. He goes, I did? He was genuinely surprised because he really didn't think that, he thought that DiMaggio was a better player. It shows he was one of the most humble superstars I've ever been around.
That is so interesting. I wish I would have met the Mick. I got to say that. So, oh my gosh, yes. And then you also, have been doing it for quite some time, and you also wrote some book as well too. We'll talk about the transition. We'll talk about the book, Classic Rock Songs, Volumes 1 and 2. But first, listen to the Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Looking at a professional website without breaking your budget? Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today, 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show, get 20% off your first project. Sonic Web Studios, take your image to the next level. Also, time to give an official shout out to our official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international award-winning author Mia Molson-Zia. If you love fast-paced mysteries, you'll love Missing by Mia Molson-Zia, available on Amazon and paperback and ebook. Missing is fast-paced and intriguing with an unforgettable twist. Takes place in 4 countries, 2 strangers, 1 target, where truth is illusion and those you love will be the first to go missing. It's available on Amazon and paperback and ebook. Missing by Mia Molson-Zia has got great reviews. In Eve 11 endorsed by Howard celebrities, including Joanna Cassidy, Forbes Riley, and many others. So grab your copy today for it goes Missing by Mia Molson-Zia, available on Amazon. Also, check out The Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com on over 40 podcast platforms, heard in other countries, including Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Also, Anchor FM, iTunes, Google Play, Amazon, Audible, Apple Music. Also heard on HamiltonRadio.net every Thursday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central. Also on BitChute and Rumble as well. Take us with you on any mobile device. Subscribe to The Mike Wagner Show on the YouTube channel. Follow The Mike Wagner Show on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok today. And for great gift ideas, go to Amazon.com. Check out The Mike Wagner Show podcast. T-shirts, pop sockets, throw pillows, tote bags, hoodies, makes great gift ideas 24/7. Go to Amazon.com, check out The Mike Wagner Show podcast. And for more great gift ideas, go to Amazon.com/MiaMelsenZia for great books like Missing, Once, and Wrinkles. Also T-shirts, pop sockets, hoodies, phone cases, and more. Amazon.com/MiaMelsenZia. Check it out today. Also support The Mike Wagner Show on Anchor FM, PayPal, and TheMikeWagnerShow.com. Make sure you do so today. We're here with the amazing, multi-talented, 5-time Emmy-award-winning sports director and 40-year veteran Dan Reagan here on The Mike Wagner Show, also an author of Classic Rock Songs Revealed Volumes 1 and 2. And first of all, how'd you make the transition going from sports over to becoming an author as well, too? It's like you did all these games like for the Mets, Yankees, Islanders, and all of a sudden you decided to go ahead and start writing some books. You write about Billy Joel, Chicago, Love and Spoonful, Jackson Browne, and more.
Well, Mike, I'll tell you, it's not the transition was a long process. I started writing the books, so started doing the interviews back in 1994.
Wow.
I did probably 30 or so interviews between 1994 and 1998, and then I put it down. I was getting, there was a bunch of circumstances. My children were very young at the time. My wife had some health issues, and I was traveling a lot. I was working with the Braves. I was working for Turner Sports. I was doing about 100 baseball games, and then I was doing the NBA. So I was really busy. And plus, there was a lot of, I would make phone calls to these artist agents, and they would say, he's not available right now. Call us back in 6 months. And I'd call back in 6 months, and they'd say, he's going out on tour to promote the record. Call us back in 6 months. So
they're getting kind of a runaround. I know how that goes.
Yeah, right. So, and with all the other things, with what else was going on with my family and my career, I just put it down. Well, a long stretch of time went by. I mean, this was 98, and now we get into the 2000s and 2010s, and I didn't write anything, I didn't do an interview, but it haunted me. I couldn't get this out of my head because I still listened to all this music, and I would hear a song like Taking Care of Business. And I interviewed Randy Bachman, and he told me about that song, and I would hear, and then the next song would come on, and it'd be, Listen to the Music by the Doobie Brothers, and Tom Johnson told me that, and I had all this information in my head, and it was like, and I had told enough people that I had started this, and a lot of them would say, "How's your book coming? How's your book coming? You got to finish it. You got to finish it." And I got a lot of push and a lot of encouragement. So around 2012, my sister-in-law self-published the book, wrote and self-published the book. She has a special needs daughter, and she wrote a book about that. And when she wrote that, I was really inspired, and I was very proud of her for doing that. And that gave me the needed kick in the pants that to get back on the horse. And I started working on it again. And then I stopped again. And then finally, 2020, we all know what happened in 2020. In March, COVID happened. And I'm probably the only person on planet Earth, besides winning a bet from Mickey Mantle, I can tell you that COVID was a blessing in disguise, because it obviously shut the world down. But then it forced me to say, I've got no work. The sports world shut down. Everything shut down. I've got to finish this book. I've got to finish this book. And a long and dear friend of mine, a guy that I've known for almost 50 years, he reached out to me, asked me if I was still looking for somebody to kind of help me edit the book and help me with the writing process. And I told him I did. His daughter was a freelance writer. He set me up with her. That's Catherine LaCroix. I called her up and I told her, I said, look, I've been going at this for the better part of 27 years now. If you tell me you're going to help me, your yes has to be yes. You can't come back to me, 6 weeks, 2 months from now and say, I've got a lot of other work. I can't do this now. We've got to do this. And she was on, she was full speed ahead, and she was great. She was just terrific. She was exactly what I needed. And I sat down, did a whole lot of more interviews, and one volume turned into two. And we launched the book last March the 18th, my wife's birthday, and here we are,
Hmm.
10 months later. And I've been very, very pleased. We had a really nice Christmas season. A lot of books were purchased for Christmas gifts, and it's been really great.
And of course, the thing a whole started with Billy Joel as well too. I can also look through the book as well too, like say with Prelude, Angry Young Man, also New York State of Mind, and also like The Entertainer as well too. And some of the things like with Moving Out, and maybe just pick a couple about the stories behind those songs. I particularly liked about Moving Out and also The Entertainer as well. Really go in depth about the whole story behind the song, not just a story, but actually like also investigative, almost like a journalistic type.
Billy Joel was very interesting. I had seen a special on him in the 90s because I interviewed him in the 90s. There was a special on the Disney Channel about dreams. And they interviewed Billy Joel, and he said on that special that a lot, if not most of his music came to him in dreams. And I was blown away by that. And so then when I got the opportunity to interview him, I really wanted to get to the bottom of that. And I wanted to ask him, one of the first things I asked him, and it's in the book, is how long have you been having these symphonic dreams? At what age did they start? And he couldn't put an age on it. He said, I don't know, probably childhood, but I really didn't realize at the time what it was that I was dreaming. So and Billy Joel is he could, if he decided to stop touring and playing music and just decided to go out and do stand-up comedy, he could, because he's really funny and he's really engaging. He's just a regular guy from Hicksville, Long Island, which is about 10 minutes from where I went to college. And he was, I mean, they were all the artists that I spoke to were really interesting, but he was, right there at the very top of the list.
And certainly as well too. You also got into Chicago as well too, and how they got started. And I think there was also Color My World, which they tried to make like an opus of it. And I think there was also a section in there about the details of Terry Kath and all the demise of Chicago as well too, like in some of the songs. Maybe just a bit about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. You had mentioned Terry Kath. The day that we're recording this is the anniversary of his death. It happened on January the 23rd, 1978, and I just wrote about it on my
Wow.
Facebook page, my Classic Rock Songs Revealed.com page. I wrote about that particular event, how it impacted my life. I was, in order to get on the air and handle the equipment at my college radio station, I had to go into New York City and take a test for the FCC. And I went the next day on the 24th. This is before the 24-hour news cycle, long before cable and all of that. And I took the test, passed it. I was really happy. I grabbed the New York Daily News and the New York Post because the big sports junkie, obviously. I hopped into the subway and I got a rare seat and I'm sitting there. And normally those newspapers you read from the back to the front, from the sports page back. But for some reason, those papers were sitting on my lap with the front page. And on the very front page, there was a little box in the bottom corner that said, Rock Star Shoots Self. And I was like, oh, I wonder who this could be. And I thought, even if it's a group that I'm not that familiar with, I might know the name. And I turned to the page, and there it was. Chicago guitarist Terry Kath accidentally shoots himself. My knees buckled. I was blown away. I was so devastated. So I did write a little bit about that in the book. I spoke to Robert Lamb about that and to Jimmy Pankow. They talked about it. You mentioned Color My World. Color My World was all part of Jimmy Pankow's magnum opus, Ballet for a Girl in Buchanan with Make Me Smile and Color My World. And he went into great detail about that. And speaking of Color My World, I had heard a story that I asked him about, and he confirmed it. Frank Sinatra wanted Jimmy Pankow to write another verse to Color My World. And his publishing company called Chicago and said, hey, if the kid, because he was only like 23 or 24 at the time, he said, hey, if the kid can write another verse, Oh Blue Eyes will record it. And Pankow chewed on that for a bit, but he decided that he just couldn't do it. He said he equated it to sewing another arm onto his kid. And I told him I was glad he didn't, because that piece of music, that 12-minute piece of music, is just, just wonderful the way it is.
Mhm. And of course, turning down the channel of the board, and of course, you're adding a piece, and you think of like, could have been done just for Frank's benefit or something, or do you think it could have been better, or you think Frank could have like maybe botched it up or something?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. I think that, um, anybody, I've written about this also on my Facebook page, and a lot of people have responded to that, saying, I would have done it, no problem, Frank Sinatra and all of that. And I thought it really took a lot of courage and gumption on Jimmy Panko's part to turn down the chairman of the board and say, nope, I wrote this song, it is the way it is. And at that time, and this song came out in the early 1970s, people were using that for their wedding songs and all of that. And it's I can, in one level, I can relate to it, because my books, I call these books, these are my twins. These are like my,
I
I have
noticed.
two,
Hey,
I
hey,
have,
hey, I've got
I
I've
have,
got twins too, right in front here. It's
yeah.
like quads or something.
So, and it's like, if those books are, I'm proud of them, and I feel very accomplished and fulfilled. But if someone were to say to me, go back into volume 2 and you can add this, and I would say, no, I can't do that. I may think about a volume 3, but no, I wouldn't. Those, they are what they are. And to ask somebody to then go in and write another verse just because a very famous singer wants to, you know, record it, it would have probably taken that song to a whole nother level. But, all credit in the world to Jimmy Pankow for saying no.
Hmm. And of course, I don't blame him as well too. I bet you Frank was probably like downing like 50 million bottles of scotch, all because he got turned down, and you hardly ever turn down the chairman of the board. I mean, I guess it all depends
Right.
too. But of course, another chapter in there which I found amazing about the Guess Who. They started in 1962, believe it or not, and they actually went up to the Who and said, "Hey, you're using our name." I mean, who had the guts to go up to say to Roger Daltrey, Pete Townsend, John Entwistle, and Keith Moon says, you can't do that? Who really had the guts to do that?
Right. Yeah. Randy Bachman went into a whole explanation about that, and they had a lot of fun with it. And it wound up, as the story goes in the book, they wound up in the same hotel together. And Bachman found out what room Pete Townsend was staying in, and he knocked on the door and he said, "Hey, you're using our name." And they had a little back and forth about it. So they changed their name to the Guess Who. They became the Guess Who. So, and I think it turned out well for both groups.
Hmm. And I remember too, there's a story about where they had all kinds of names and everything. They couldn't come up with a name, and they'd be like, hey, you're using our name, using our name. And then finally, a record promoter just put a question mark and said, Guess Who? And I think that's what really started it. I think that was very clever marketing, and whoever did that should get a lot of credit for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
And they're one of Canada's real success stories too. I mean, there are a lot of great Canadian artists, but they were one of the very first, big Canadian groups. They were inspired by Neil Young, of course. But yeah, the Guess Who is, that was a very fun chapter. Randy Bachman and Burton Cummings both were terrific guys, and they were very forthcoming with the stories behind their songs. And of course, Randy Bachman then became, Bachman Turner Overdrive, and I wrote about some of those songs as well.
Hmm. And of course, another fellow Canadian too, you also mentioned in the book, is Gordon Lightfoot as well too. 83 and still going, believe it or not. So I'm just going through his book as we speak, and like I said, this is just really, really hard to put down. I got to say that. So we'll also cover some others as well too, and of course, story about Gordon Lightfoot. If you could read my mind, Sundown, and of course, my favorite, the Ballad of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which was about the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald up in Lake Superior. And I remember that song stood out because my folks went up there for a little bit of a honeymoon in the upper Michigan around the time. And then we asked when they'll get back, and all of a sudden news broke that in that neck of the woods that the Edmund sank and took out
Wow.
what was about 50, 60 people on board, and had a big funeral for it. And I thought, holy cow, that hit everybody up in that area.
Yeah, it did. And Gordon Lightfoot, that was his only #1 hit, and he that that song is very similar in the way that it was written to "A Day in the Life" by the Beatles. In that, John Lennon took right out of the newspaper the events that he was reading from I guess the London Daily Mail or whatever. But the same thing happened with Gordon Lightfoot. He was reading about this tragedy, and he just pretty much wrote the song based on everything he read in the article about the sinking of the Evan Fitzgerald. And he said he wanted to be very cognizant of the family's feelings, and he wanted to make sure that he was true to the account, and he didn't want to sensationalize it. And I saw a video of him in his home, and he's got the magazine article framed, and he pointed to it, and he said, this is the magazine, this is the article that I read, and I just pretty much lifted it right from there. And they recorded it in one take. The take you hear that became the hit on the radio, they did that in one take.
Wow, that is something. How often do people do that? It makes you wonder about that.
Yeah, there are a lot of songs that people write where it just comes to them, and they don't have to go back and fix a part or something. But when you go into the studio, a lot of times, it can take, depending on who it is, like Steely Dan, who I wrote about. I spoke with their longtime producer, Gary Katz. It would take upwards to a year to make an album. And when I say a year, they would work every single day. So,
Wow.
and that costs, that time is money, as the expression goes. Time is money. But Gordon Lightfoot went in and they recorded the record of the Edmund Fitzgerald in one take.
That is amazing. Great way to save money. And of course, another group that just takes up, a whole year in the studio is Boston as well, too. Like with Don't Look Back, Amanda, and everything else. And, a story a bit behind it, too. Tom Scholz, I mean, he's just so creative.
Tom Scholz was really an interesting person to speak to. In fact, with no disrespect to people in rock and roll, it's this, and you would know this too, Mike, that when you shake the rock and roll star tree, you're not going to find very many MIT graduates. Tom Scholz is an MIT graduate, and he was working in his basement, in his garage, in his basement, making all these demos and working at Polaroid. And as he shared this story, his boss had to lay off some people. And he came to him and he said, look, I've got to lay some people off and I don't want to let you go. But if you're going to go and do this music thing, I'd rather let you go and pursue your music than let somebody, than somebody else. And Tom Scholz looked at him and said, are you kidding? The chances of me making any kind of money off of the music I'm doing is like 1 in a million. And the boss was like, oh, okay, fine, good. I'll keep you on because I didn't want to lose you. A year later, Boston's first album comes, and it just blows up. And Scholz goes back in, and he's emptying out his desk, and he's at the elevator with a box that we can all picture this scene. And the boss comes out of his office across from the elevator. He looks at me, he goes, 1 in a million, huh? He goes, that had to be somebody.
Oh my goodness, that is something. Well, speaking of 1 in a million, Christy McVie also did a song on that too, 1 in a million, along with Over My Head and her ventures on Fleetwood Mac. The story behind that, I mean, 1 in a million. So it's like you think Tom Scholz is 1 in a million, Christy McVie 1 in a million. How do you like that?
Yeah, Christine McVie, I mourn her passing. She was such a special lady. She was a real treat to speak to as well. And she just passed away a couple of months ago. And when she passed, I put up on my Facebook page the story that she's told me about her song Songbird, which was from the Rumors album.
Mm-hmm.
And I would invite everybody that hopefully will go buy the book, classicrocksongsrevealed.com. They can get it at my website. And she's in volume 1, and she went into detail about that song. And I told her prior to interviewing her that day that I had gone back and listened to it, and all that time that I had listened to the numbers of times I had listened to that song, I always thought it was a song about a loved one, about a lover or something like that. I said, but there was something that just struck me when I listened to it that day, that it could be about a parent to a child, or some, your song to somebody who's ill. And she said, that's right. You're exactly right. It could be for anybody. And she was, she actually wrote more songs than anybody else in Fleetwood Mac. She wrote more songs than Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. And that's a huge loss, losing Christine McVie. And such a
Hmm.
special lady.
Hmm. And certainly one in a million as well too. And of course, also losing one of the favorites as well too, Jim Croce, one of my favorites. Being very young, and of course experiencing like a huge loss. I was looking forward to buy one of his albums. Maybe I can bug my parents to go see Jim Croce come to Chicago and all that. And I remember cleaning out one of my the rooms and everything, just to get an allowance and everything, save up to buy a Jim Croce album. Then I started hearing on the radio that Jim Croce was killed in a plane crash. I mean, that was a legacy right there with Time in a Bottle. And of course, story behind Bad, Bad, Leroy Brown, and more as well, too. I mean, he was just so prolific and gone too soon.
Gone way too soon. And you know something, Mike, I'll tell you, when I started out this process back in 1994, I made a list of people that I wanted to talk to, and I included producers. I had seen a special done on the making of Sergeant Pepper. And of course, the great George Martin was the fifth Beatle. And George Martin had so much, just a wealth of knowledge, and it contributed so much to the making of all their records, but especially the making of Sergeant Pepper. And so that really had an impact on me. And so I decided that when I was going to go about this book, I was going to try and speak to as many producers as I could. And I was able, two of the very first people that I interviewed, besides Kenny Loggins, was Jim Croce's producers, Tommy West and Terry Cashman. And those two guys, I mean, Tommy West was one of his best friends, and Terry Cashman and West were very close. And they worked with him on all of his records, and they spoke a lot about Jim the person and Jim the musician. And it was, all the music that he did that became so successful and that we still enjoy to this day, he did that in a span of 18 months. And I think that he's one of the most underrated singer songwriters of that era, because he was very talented.
Mm-hmm. And certainly talented D as well too. And we'll cover volume 2 of classic rock songs revealed as well too with Dan Reagan. First, listen to the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios and brought to you by official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international war-winning author Mia Molson's The Missing, available on Amazon and paperback and ebook. We'll be back with the multi-talented 5-time Emmy-award-winning sports director and author of classic rock songs revealed, Dan Reagan, after this time out. We're back with the author of Classic Rock Songs Revealed, Volumes 1 and 2, and 5-time Emmy-award-winning sports director Dan Reagan here on the Mike Wagner Show. I mean, you covered a lot of ground when it came to sports and everything else, a lot of great stories, and also some great stories with volume as well, too. And briefly with volume 2 as well, too, without giving away too much of the book, we also go into the Eagles, like with, Don Henley, Glenn Fry, and all those guys. You got Steely Dan, the Doobie Brothers, and more as well, too. And, of course, Foreigner was a great story as well, too. It was just like Boston. It's like, had one of the guys, Mick Jones, especially at Wits End, this is the last group I'll be doing. It's either a make it or break. And that was just a great story, Mick Jones and Foreigner.
Well, thank you. Yeah, he had come from a group called Spooky Tooth, and he moved to New York, and he, as you said, he was like, this is my last shot. And he wanted to make a go of it. And he wanted a certain sound. He wanted a certain voice, just like Tom Scholz was looking for a certain sound with Brad Delp. Mick Jones was looking for a certain singer, a certain lead singer that could sing these songs. And he was turned on to Lou Gramm, and he and Lou Gramm hooked up. And their first 4 albums were like, I think I wrote in the book, number 4, number 3, number 2, and number 2. Their first 4 albums, they were huge for a time there.
And certainly they also, shot to the top as well, too, like with some of the songs like I Want to Know What Love Is, Jukebox Hero, and everything else. And of course, what would you say is the most interesting story behind the song among Foreigner? What was the most interesting to you?
Well, there were a few. Double Vision. Lou Gramm was telling me the story that he was in the recording booth, and they were doing Double Vision. But he didn't have the hook. He didn't have the title. He didn't know what to call the song. They were laying down the track, and there was a break in the recording, and in his little booth there was a small little TV monitor, and the NHL playoffs were going on, and the Rangers were playing, and he was really into it. And so there was a break in the recording, so he turned the dial up in the booth to hear what was going on, because the Rangers goaltender John Davidson had gotten hit and was down.
Ooh.
And they took him off the ice. And then the report came back that John Davidson was experiencing double vision.
Wow.
And when Lou Gramm heard that, he went, "Oh, that's it." And he took it from there. A hockey goaltender getting hit in the head by a puck, experiencing double vision. That gave him the inspiration to call that song Double Vision.
That is
And then
so
I want to
interesting.
know the song I Want to Know What Love Is. They brought in a choir to sing behind them. And Mick Jones talked about what a moving time that was. The choir all got together and they said, "Do you mind if we say a prayer before we start?" And he said, "Oh, by all means, go ahead." And he said it was just an unbelievable experience. And Lou Gramm, and I told Lou Gramm this, his vocal on that song, I Want to Know What Love Is, was just spectacular.
Mm-hmm. And certainly amazing indeed as well too. And of course, lastly we'll talk about the Eagles as well too. And of course, Don Henley, Glenn Fry, and all those guys getting as well too. Randy Meisner, and the story behind Hotel California, many stories behind it. And of course, what was your take on Hotel California when they wrote as well?
My take,
Yes, in the book.
So my take when that song came out, and I've told a lot of people this, is that part of the reason why I wanted to write this book was because I was always fascinated what the songs were about, obviously. And what really gave me the inspiration was when John Lennon, who was my favorite musician, when he was murdered, a couple of months after that, Playboy released a series of interviews that they had done with Lennon. And the second one, John Lennon described what all the Beatles songs were about, every single one. And I was just fascinated by that. And I saved it and kept it. And at the time when I was reading it, I was thinking to myself, why can't everybody do this? Why can't everybody tell us what these songs are about? So that's 1981 when that came out. And so now you fast forward and I'm doing the book, and well, Hotel California came out and everybody was thinking it was about drugs and this is, fast living in California and all that. And critics, rock critics and Rolling Stone people would write, "This is what the song's about." And I kept reading these articles and I'm thinking, I don't see Glenn Fry's quote there. I don't see Don Henley's quote there. And so I asked both of those guys, tell me, what was it about? And they both credited, we just mentioned them a moment ago, they both credited to some extent Steely Dan and how brave Walter Becker and Donald Fagen were at their writing table, the things that they would write about, how they would write about cryptic things. And, they said, yeah, were we were observers of the situation? Were we participants? Yeah, probably, of the over-the-top lifestyle then. But that's really kind of what we were doing. We were inspired by the fact that Steely Dan, would be a little edgy in their lyrics, and we decided that we were going to try and do something like that. And I asked Don Henley, the line in "Stab It with Their Steely Knives, but they just can't kill the beast," was that a tip of the cap to Steely Dan? And because Steely Dan had written a song on their the album that Kid Charlemagne is on.
My favorite. I love that
The Royal
song.
Scam.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, The Royal Scam. So on The Royal Scam, there's a song, Everything You Did, and there's a line in that, "Turn up the Eagles, the neighbors are listening." And so I asked Henley, was that line, "Stab It with their steely knives," like a payback? And he said, well, not necessarily a payback, but yeah, it was kind of a tip of the cap to them. And then he talked about what that line in particular meant. And I won't go into it here. I'll let the people read about it in volume 2.
Mm-hmm. We certainly do so as well too. And of course, one thing that really stood out was Mr. Roboto by Styx, and of course, about Doma Migato, and tied in Mr. Roboto, and about the future and everything else, and just a bit more about it. It's like, I often think of the Volkswagen commercials.
That, and now you're getting into he was Dennis DeYoung. He was one of the very last people that I spoke with during the pandemic, and he was really fun. Most of my interviews, I would tell the people that I wanted like 45 minutes to an hour, and I would play it, see how it was going. And I would tell them, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. And if they said, no, well, let's keep going, we keep going. Dennis DeYoung and I spoke for well over 2 hours, and he's the kind of guy you'd want to sit down and have a beer with. And he went into great detail about that song, Mr. Roboto, and about all of the Styx songs that he wrote. Most of them are about his wife of 53 years. He
Wow.
and his wife just had their 53rd anniversary on January the 18th. So yeah, it was he was very gregarious, very funny, very honest, very forthright. He took a shot or two at some rock critics and stuff, and so yeah, that's a fun chapter.
It sounded like a fun chapter too. And going back to the Beatles, this just came up in my mind as well too. With John Lennon going over a list of all the songs the Beatles wrote. What was the most interesting story that you read about John Lennon when it came to the Beatles? What was the most interesting song that was described in detail according to John Lennon?
I would have to say Strawberry Fields Forever. And he said that the line in that song, no one I think is in my tree, I mean, it must be high or low. What that line meant, according to Lennon, was that even as a young kid, he was seeing things and as an adult would. He was grown up as like 8, 9, 10-year-old, and he was able to just see things differently than most kids could do. So that no one I think is in my tree, that was his way of saying, I'm seeing things going on here that I don't really quite understand, because he was mature beyond his years. And so that was really fascinating. And of course, we mentioned A Day in the Life, how he could just read an article out of a newspaper and just pick off all the events from that day's news and then write a song about it. He and Paul McCartney, I mean, they were the best. They were just the best.
And of course, lastly, talk about the day in the life of Grand Funk Railroad and their sudden rise to the top with Mark Farner, who I had on my show. And I mean, just a fascinating story and day of life of Grand Funk Railroad, just starting off in Flint, Michigan, and just working away. It's like, what was it, 18 months? It's like they go from playing to maybe less than 100 people, 500, and all of a sudden, within 18 months or less, they're playing for like, 50, 100,000 people or something?
Yeah, there was a big rock festival here in Atlanta, Georgia, in fact, and 100,000 people were there, and they played in front of them. That's right. Mark Farner was very, really, really good guy. And of course his magnum opus is I'm Your Captain, getting closer to home, and he
One of my
went into
favorites.
that. In fact, one of my favorites too. And he kind of dreamt that song, as a matter of fact. He talked about how before he went to bed that night, he said a prayer and he asked, God to give him something special, give him a special song. He woke up in the middle of the night and he just wrote down some lyrics, and he didn't know what these lyrics were or what was attached to. And then later on that morning, he was outside having some coffee, and then something came into it. It's this melody, and he went and grabbed the guitar and started playing. And he hit that first chord, that very recognizable first chord, to I'm Your Captain. And then he was like, I think this is what those lyrics are supposed to be for. And I mean, and that song has taken on a whole nother life of its own. And it has such special meaning to veterans, especially Vietnam veterans, but all veterans. And that is just, such a wonderful piece of music.
And certainly this as well too. We know some people who did similar too. We also, also you have in the chapters as well too, talking about the Doors, Orleans, the Moody Blues, Super Tramp, and more. But of course, where can we find your book, and how can we, get a hold of your book and your website at, Dan?
So my books are available on my website, classicrocksongsrevealed.com. And you can get them there. They're $20 a piece, and shipping is $4 or $5. I'm happy to sign them if people want me to sign them. I love signing books and sending them out to people. They're also available on Amazon if people want to read them by Kindle. They can get them on Amazon. I prefer people get them from my website, of course, but it's classicrocksongsrevealed.com.
We'll certainly check that out. Once again, we're author Dan Reagan of Reagan, a classic rock songs reveal volumes 1 and 2, 5-time Emmy-award-winning sports director and 40-year veteran here on the Mike Wagner Show. Dan, just a few more things. We'd love to have you back more about volume 2. If you want to do a so-called volume 3, that's fine. Any updates as well, too. And what else can we expect from him in 2023 and beyond, Dan?
That's a good question, Mike. I don't know. I'm thinking, I really did enjoy after it was all said and done. Billy Joel had a great quote, and I'm going to steal it from him. I don't like writing, but I love having written. I grew to like the writing, and then once I got Catherine, that made it so much better. I would like to write something else. I don't know what that is. Maybe about music. Some people have asked me about a volume 3, but with the amount of people that I've asked along the way to be in these first 2 books that said no, that a lot of people would have to change their minds. And sadly, to be honest with you, we're losing people. We're losing people of the classic rock era.
Oh my gosh.
So it's really sad. We just lost David Crosby. So I don't know, maybe something along the, I'm really thinking maybe I would like to do something about, maybe a biography of a rock star. I don't know. A lot of people thought when they heard I was writing a book that I was writing about sports and about my stories, in my career. But most of the stories that I have, and I've got a lot of them from my sports television career, are stories that maybe not necessarily show some famous people in a very good light. And I don't really want to write that book. So I'd rather stick to probably music.
Or a really good sports figure that also really good drummer, Mike Piazza. It's like, you can tie him in too. It's like I saw him play drums. I'm like, holy cow, this guy's going to be up there too. Mike Piazza's a drummer.
Who's a great drummer is Ron Guidry, the old Yankee pitcher. He is a really good drummer.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I think that's a great idea for you. Having pitchers play drums or whatever it is. I think that'd be like a volume 3 right there. I just hopefully lit something in you, Dan.
I'll take it under advisement, Mike. I appreciate the idea.
We'll certainly run with it as well, too, if God willing. And also a couple of things. Who do you consider biggest influence in your career, Dan?
My biggest influence in my career?
Yes.
Well, it would have to go back to that college professor that I spoke about, Christopher Dodrell. Like when I was a senior, he told that girl that I had to direct that show, and that was the furthest thing from my mind. I wanted to be the next Marv Albert. Marv Albert was a great radio, and I grew up in New York listening to Marv and Bob Murphy do the Mets, and that's what I wanted to do. I never thought about being in TV, but he would be there. The radio station manager at my college radio station, Bill Moser, was a really big influence in my career. And then my two bosses, my first boss at Sports Channel, Jerry Pissarro, he's the one that gave me my first shot to direct. And I owe him a whole lot. Jerry Pissarro, I owe, a lot of my career to. And then my boss at ESPN, Dan Steer, those people are the ones that really pushed me and believed in me and gave me opportunities.
And certainly did as well, too, made the most of it, Dan. And what's the best advice you can give to anybody at this point?
The best advice I would give people is the advice that the great Jim Valvano gave, and that, very memorable speech that has now become the mantra for the V Foundation. Don't give up. Don't ever give up. Because these books are a testament to perseverance. And whether it's writing a book or whatever it is, if you have a dream, don't stop chasing it. Don't ever doubt yourself. Don't ever, not believe in your ability to get something done. Because I'm living proof that after 28 years, I can get something done. And so work hard. There's no substitute for hard work, but never disbelieve in yourself. Always have the confidence that you can do something.
And I want to say, Dan, you become my biggest fan with this book here. I got to say that. So that's amazing.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate it. It's been I've really enjoyed speaking with you. It's been a lot of fun. and I hope that I can come back someday and do it again.
We certainly will do so. We're here with author Dan Reagan of Classic Rock Songs Revealed 1 and 2 here on the Mike Wagner Show. Dan, a very big thank you for your time. You've been absolutely amazing. Absolutely learned a lot from you. You got to do this again, and looking forward to having again soon. Just keep us up to date. Keep in touch. Once again, what's your website? How do people contact you? Where can people purchase or check out your books?
Thank you. It's classicrocksongsrevealed.com. This is what it looks like, classicrocksongsrevealed.com. If you're a Kindle reader, you can get them on Amazon, but the better way is through the website, classicrocksongsrevealed.com. And you can also follow me on Facebook at classicrocksongsrevealed.com.
We will certainly do so. Once again, Dan, a very big thank you for your time. You've been absolutely amazing. Looking forward to having you again soon. Keep us up to date. Keep in touch. Live have you back and wish you all the best. And Dan, you definitely have a great future ahead of you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate it. All the best to you.